Whether legal or illegal, industrial timber is a very demanding land use type. It impacts significantly on water, it competes with indigenous biodiversity, and it reduces the land that's available for traditional uses.
Timber plantations are not forests, and as such they impact on people's access to biodiversity, people's access to grasslands for grazing their cattle. They also impact in terms of security issues, as well as displacing societies from areas that they grew up into.
Blessing Karambidza of the University of KwaZulu-Natal recently completed a study for Timberwatch and the World Rainforest Movement on the economic, social and cultural impacts of timber plantations.
Decisions being made on whether to continue expanding or not expanding timber plantations in South Africa were based largely on economic and environmental impact assessments, which much of the time ignored or did not focus on social and cultural impacts. And as a result, the decisions that were made were biased against the society and the way they lived day to day.
And when illegal plantations are factored in, the impacts are more than doubled. Of the 3 million hectares of arable land in South Africa that's covered by alien timber tree species such as pine, wattle and eucalyptus, more than half is illegal. Either plantations in wetlands, plantations on steep slopes, plantations in road or fire belts, or invasive scrub timber. In other words, timber grown without a license where it shouldn't be grown. Since 1972, all new timber plantations required a permit from the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry so that they could manage the water use stresses on river catchments. The 1998 Water Act introduced even stricter requirements, and now all plantations must be registered for water use. James Perkins of the department explains.
Subsequent to 1998, you need a license for stream flow reduction from the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry. You need authorization from the Department of Agriculture and Environmental Affairs, the KZN department, and you need authorization from the National Department of Agriculture to break new land.
Timber is a stream flow reduction activity, but despite the law, environmental groups such as Timberwatch still encounter new illegal plantations. James Wakelin of Izembelo KZN Wildlife was asked to investigate the extent of the problem in KwaZulu-Natal.
This is a study area here with the N3 highway running north-south through the study area.
The sample area he identified in the Upper Umgeni catchment includes endemic mistbelt grasslands, a large proportion of the province's wattled crane breeding sites, and is important for water supply to Pietermaritzburg and Durban. It's also an area that's been closed to further water use for at least 10 years.
We then obtained satellite coverage for this sample area, which showed us where the afforestation existed. We then overlay the indigenous forest coverage, and we clipped out that indigenous forest coverage. Here you can see the indigenous forest coverage here in green.
This improves confidence in the data.
Then we took the dwarf coverage, which is in brown for the sample area, showing us where all the licensed and permitted plantations are across this area, the sample area. And here we have the unaccounted for timber.
Of the 500,000 hectares that James sampled, 78,000 hectares of timber plantations is not accounted for. That's 15% of the surface area sampled. And it's all in endemic mistbelt grassland areas, many threatening wattled crane breeding sites.
To take this now a step forward to find out exactly who's responsible for this timber is you can overlay the property cadastral boundaries, and here you can identify the specific properties where this unaccounted for timber is to be found.
And if enacted, the law is not kind to illegal plantation owners. Once a plantation is identified as unlawful, the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry steps in and issues a directive to the landowner or farmer to remove them.
If the farmer does not comply with that directive, and we usually give them a month or two, we will then step in and remove those trees at the farmer's expense. On some occasions, we have only got a reaction from certain farmers when we've been at the farm gate with our working for water team with their chainsaws revving.
Whichever way it's done, it's a costly exercise for the plantation owner, but considerably less costly than denying water to those who need it. Of the 100 or so cases reported since 2000, 25 were processed, but chairperson of the Unlawful Afforestation Task Team, Wolfgang Kanz, says it's certainly not enough.
The problem is very serious, and we anticipate once we start using this information that a lot more cases will be reported.
New regulations will increase the burden on officials, and James Wakeland's satellite identification techniques will be used in other parts of KZN too to identify properties with illegal plantations.
It'll become a lot harder for landowners to not comply with the legislation. These new methods will make it very difficult for people to plant unlawfully.
Ultimately, we will get every one of them brought to book.
So certainly there's a roving eye on illegal timber growers in this province.